welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, everybody. This is Barney Levantino. Welcome to the latest chapter of Turn the Page, the Syosset Library podcast. And with me today is best-selling author Ace Atkins. And Mr. Atkins, welcome.
Thank you.
And in fact, I'm going to say welcome back. You and I had a chance to speak last year when the Revelators came out.
That's right.
And it's nice to have found myself back in Tibuhaud County for a little bit, reading the newest entry, The Heathens.
Oh,
and
great.
this is book 11 in the series. And it's funny, after I read the book, I kind of went back and I picked up The Ranger again because I hadn't read it in a while. And I started rereading it. And the book opens with Quinn Colson heading back home after a long absence in the Army and doing his thing. And my first question to you is, as you were writing those first chapters, did you picture 11 books down the road that Quinn would still be in Tibuhaud County cleaning it up and doing what he does?
You know, I certainly hope so. I mean, that was the plan and the dream is to have a long continuing series. And, you know, and I wrote another series early in my career that, you know, I wrote 4 books and that was it for a variety of reasons. And Quinn Colson was really designed to be something that would last for a while. And I think by the very nature of the fact that he's a sheriff, that he's covering a very corrupt county in Mississippi, there's always something to write about. There's always a new story to come in and out, and there's a number of possibilities. But I'm to say that I had hoped for 11 books, but I'm really pleased that the readers keep it going, because if they didn't, there wouldn't be 11 books. So I'm thrilled that this series is continuing.
Well, the newest entry in the series is The Heathens, and as always, it's great characters, great story, great writing.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about this latest one.
So, you know, I really changed things up in the Revelators. And as we talked about last year, the Revelators was so much about burning down what I had established in this county as far as the criminal empires, as far as the people that were involved in some long-running story arcs. And so this was a friend of mine who runs a bookstore here in town said this would be a great entry point into the series. It's a place you can start over because it is a new beginning. The story itself is about a young girl, 17-year-old girl, that's been accused of murdering her own mother. And because she feels like nobody is listening to her side of things, she ends up taking her boyfriend and her best friend, all these teenagers, and then her 10-year-old brother, stealing a minivan and leaving Tibuhaud County and lighting out from Memphis and into Arkansas. And so it's really almost like a road trip novel in many ways. But during this time, there are people who are trying to uncover the truth back home, and that's where Quinn comes in.
I think that the story I read somewhere was loosely based on some true events that you had covered back as a reporter way back when.
Yeah, this was a case from back in 1998. At the time, I was a young newspaper reporter covering the crime beat down in Tampa. I worked for the old Tampa Tribune, which is a great old newspaper. And so I covered this a little bit as a crime reporter, and then I covered some of the court coverage as well. But it was a shocking case. You know, it was a story that will stay with you. It may be one of the most horrific murders that I covered as a journalist. And then to know that this was perpetuated by a 14-year-old girl killing her mother is just it's unfathomable. But it circled back around being the whole catalyst was, you know, what if these kids had been innocent? And that's, you know, if they were lighting out for the West Coast with people on their heels, what if they really had not done this crime? And that's where it gelled and worked for me as a novelist.
Mm-hmm. The story itself kind of pits two old pals, Quinn and Lily Virgil, who had worked closely together over the years. And in this one, they're kind of on the opposite side of things, at least initially. It strikes me here in Tibahook County, your stories, unlike a crime story that takes place in a big city where the investigators are coming in cold, here, this is a small county where everything is kind of colored by personal relationships among the parties, histories between the parties, and in some sense, the histories that Quinn and Lily Virgil brought to the events kind of colors their view of what happened and points them in particular directions. And it was interesting to see them on two different sides of the coin in this story.
And that was one of the things I thought about very early on is Lily has been in the book since The Ranger. She's kind of broadened her professional scope. She's now a U.S. Marshal working up in Memphis. And I like the idea that Quinn and Lily were not seeing eye to eye as far as the guilt of this young girl, TJ Bird, and how they would handle this. So that was something that was attractive to me about to writing this story. But yeah, what you're talking about, the difference between is spot on as far as the city is a place where everyone can be anonymous with the people coming in contact, and you don't have that personal history. But if you are somebody that works in law enforcement in a rural area or a small town, most of the people that you're dealing with, and your idea and your perception and your knowledge is working with a whole different skill set.
In this particular case, Quinn had some interactions with TJ in other occasions, and Lily brought to the table a relationship with TJ's mother from when they were kids. And I think that we talked last time about some of the strong women characters in the books. And Lily, obviously, in this case, is a strong character. But TJ, in her own way, is a really, really strong character. She's had kind of a rough deck dealt to her. And she's dealt with it in, I guess, the best way she could. And it seems that her primary motivation is keeping an eye out for her younger brother.
That's exactly who she is. And, I always go back to my training as a newspaper reporter and as a journalist to find real stories, real people. And I think the goal of any time for a novelist is to write something as authentically as possible. So I was fortunate. I have a buddy of mine here in town who's a deputy sheriff. Before that, he was a school resource officer. And so we talked a lot about kids like TJ who, weren't necessarily bad kids, problem kids, but were dealing with a hell of a lot of stuff in their life that they're dealing with, taking care of their siblings. They're taking care with putting food on the table. When we think about the average high school experience for kids, these kids don't have time to be high schoolers. They've got to be parents. They got to be breadwinners. They got to be protectors. And so there are a lot of young people, I think everywhere, not just in the South, all over this country, that are having to deal with things and having to take care of their own siblings. And so I heard a lot of personal stories, and those personal stories came into who TJ became.
There's also an element here of social media and the role it plays nowadays in people's lives. And the character Chastity, who is the one who's kind of pushing the posting of TJ's story on social media. And Chastity, in a lot of ways, to me, seems to be more interested in getting the number of hits and getting the number of followers than really getting into the substance of what's going on. And I think it's an interesting commentary on the way things are going now, where you have people becoming famous just for being famous. It's
the times. It's the times we're living in. I mean, it is insane. I mean, for the people who grew up during a time where this stuff didn't even exist, was not even a thought. And that's what's so different about this story as opposed to the real case that was inspired this from 20 years ago. There was no social media, and I wondered how this case may have played out differently had there been social media, if they had attracted more followers. But the obsession with social media, the obsession with being famous just for being famous, it's a disease. It's a crazy thing that we're dealing with kids, and I won't just say with kids, with adults and everything. People viewing the number of likes as far as their self-worth, and when the gang, the TJ and the gang come across Chastity, she knows she's found her meal ticket. She knows that she has found somebody who is going to make her internet famous. And I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of people like her.
It's kind of like I guess I'm going to date myself also now that a lot of us were brought up in a time where we tried to kind of keep things a little more on the private side.
Right, for sure. I mean, when I was growing up a teenager, I didn't want anyone to know my business. These kids, I'm dating myself, talk about kids today, but everyone wants to share every little detail of their life. And, I was brought up at a time, I think you were too, or, you kept things to yourself, but, there's too much information out there.
So I guess we're kind of past the tipping point on that, though. I don't think we're going to get that toothpaste back in the tube.
I agree. Although I would say that at some point I'm going to go back to an old landline phone just hung up in my kitchen and mail only. We'll see if I ever get there.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
The other kids that are along for the ride, TJ's boyfriend, Ladarius, interesting character. Also somebody who is a little bit of a miscreant, but seems to be a fundamentally decent person back, way deep down inside.
Yeah, I think, Ladarius McKay, this is kids that I hear these stories about. I really do. I love checking in with my friends in law enforcement. And, frequently you'll hear about somebody who's a good kid. He's got all the potential in the world. He's super smart. He can do all those things, but he just, is getting involved doing these petty crimes. And so Ladarius he's a car thief, and he knows how to do break-ins, and he works with a car theft ring, and he does that. But fundamentally, he's a good person. He's doing this really to get by, just to make the ends meet. But I think, again, Quinn kind of recognizes that kind of personality and doesn't hold that against him. But they're all smart kids. They're all smart kids. And I think what many of them have in common is having to fend for themselves and being independent and from a very early age.
Well, talking about being independent from an early age, John Wesley is his little boy who speaks like a much older child than he is. He's old beyond his years in a lot of ways, and yet he's still a child.
Yeah,
and it's interesting.
And I don't think for me, Barney, I don't think that I even maybe even touched the surface as far as what kids are going through in rural, I want to say rural and urban communities and everything that have to go through life-changing events. Some of the stories I heard from people in law enforcement or people who do social work, it's heartbreaking. I mean, what these kids have to go through to get tough, and kids that are 8, younger than that, worried about where their next meal is coming from. So even John Wesley, TJ's little brother, has had to become, hardened very quickly, and he's a little bit salty in the process.
You talked about briefly, and the way you put it, I had phrased it differently in my notes here. I was going to ask you about it, but you mentioned that in the Revelators, you burned a lot of what had come before. And I had kind of made a note to myself that nature abhors a vacuum, but so too does organized crime in a lot of ways. And you burned a lot in the Revelators, and we didn't see much of him. He just popped in the last couple of paragraphs of the Revelators. But Johnny Stagg is back to fill that vacuum again. Talk a little bit about Johnny Stagg. He's an interesting character.
Johnny Stagg is that character that fortunately people love to hate. He is a wheeler dealer. He is a con man. He is involved in local politics. He is involved in organized crime. There are a lot of Johnny Staggs here in North Mississippi, and I think there's a lot of Johnny Staggs in New York and Michigan and everywhere else. Every county, has a Johnny Stagg kind of figure, maybe with a slightly different accent, but same kind of person. But Johnny was a long-running character early on in the series. He was in the Ranger going up until the Redeemers, 5th book in the series. And eventually I had to put him in fictional jail. I mean, he had been too bad. He'd done too many things, and it wasn't realistic anymore that he just could go through life without, getting charged with crimes. And so he's been in prison, and through the events of the Revelators, and through with a deal that he cut with the federal authorities, he was able to get himself out. So now Johnny Stagg, who's, quintessential redneck politician, wheeler dealer, huckster, he's back in Tibahaw County. And of course, at this point, what else is he trying to do? But he's trying to tell people that he is a redeemed man. He has turned a corner, and he has found a new lease on life. And so Johnny is back, and he's running this place called the Rebel Truck Stop, which was for years a part of the criminal enterprise in North Mississippi, but now he's dedicated part of this enterprise to running a family-friendly theme park. And so that's where part of his action's going right now.
Well, on the surface, he's come full circle, but beneath the surface, we're not quite so sure, and it's pretty clear that he hasn't. But
you can never trust a man in the South that has come out of something that says he is straight and he has found Jesus. And anytime you hear that, you gotta keep one eye open. And with Johnny Stagg, you're certainly doing this story.
You have in this book several different characters that are on the opposite side from Quinn. You have Johnny Stagg, you have Chester Pratt, you have a sheriff from the other county, each of whom are miscreants in their own way, and there are different levels and different competencies in their approach to their activities. Chester Pratt is an interesting character. He seems like he's kind of gotten caught up in a lot of things that have just completely gotten out of control for him, and his buttons are being pushed from every direction.
He's a guy. Chester Pratt is the person whose life is becoming unhinged, and it's not. Will Rogers once said, "Everything is funny as long as it's happening to somebody else." And I think that's really what is tragically funny about Chester Pratt is his life is coming unglued, and it's everything is he's trying to plug every hole that he can. He's trying to hedge all of his bets, and he's a man who is coming undone. And that's what his whole story is about, is to see how he's trying to cover up the mess that he has created. And hopefully that gives a little bit of comic relief during this. He's not a good character, but he's not a good person, but I think he's a good character.
Yeah, and it's his attempts to, as you say, undo the damage and the difficulties that he's having. I think it's a really good example of the law of unintended consequences. I think that he made an effort to fix one issue for himself, and that just set the whole ball rolling in this whole story.
One quick fix ended up being a multitude of problems for Chester. And but he, I know a lot of guys like Chester, and I know a lot of guys who think they can talk their way out of things and make things happen. And he's trying to get money on one side and pay another person, and he's just living on the edge of everything. And he definitely is coming unglued in this book.
And unfortunately, his ungluing, the consequences are not just to him, but there are severe consequences for pretty much everybody else.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned earlier about the different levels of competency. That's absolutely, the different characters bring their own unique skill set or no skill set to the story. And Johnny Stagg and Chester Pratt definitely work in different ways.
I haven't even touched on the Nixes.
Yeah.
A couple of interesting characters also.
The Nixes. And the Nixes, I guess, if you're ever in a traveling cross country and find yourself at a truck stop and there's two really creepy looking guys sitting next to you at the truck stop, and you have to find yourself maybe moving a few tables away, that's the father and son team of Dusty and Flynn Nix.
Two very scary people.
Very repulsive in every moral, physical, every kind of way. They're here. They're real.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I got to ask you another question for a northern guy, and they keep popping up in the story. What's a fried pie?
What's a fried pie?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think the equivalent. I know you guys have you've got to have something. It's a pie. It's a little pie that people make and then they deep fry it. So it's like a little small. You can't eat it. I mean, they're terrible for you. But it's like somebody will make a peach pie, and it's like a little individual pie, and then they deep fry it, and then they sell them at convenience stores. Or they sell them at farmers markets, and they make them a lot. They stuff them with apricot jam or whatever, and terrible for you, but they are tasty.
Showing my ignorance, but I had to ask. It's been a pleasure talking to you again. The story is great, as I said early on. Great characters, great story, and terrific writing as always.
Thanks, Barney.
What's coming down the road for you after this one?
I'm out of the South at the moment. I am wrapping up my 10th book for the Robert Parker estate, latest Spencer novel, and it is all set in Boston. And so I'm working on that right now, and that book will be out in later on this year.
We will look forward to that. I know one of my colleagues here is a sponge when it comes to the Spencer books. He's waiting patiently for the next.
They're always so much fun to write, and I really got my start from reading Robert Parker, and so I always wanted to do a Southern version inspired by what Parker did. So it's been an honor to do this for the last 10 years.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great. The book is terrific. It's here at the library. Come pick it up. We have the whole series, and we've got the Spencer books as well. And welcome back, and hope to talk to you down the road.
Thanks, Barney. We'll talk again, and I appreciate the support. Thank you.
Always. Thank you very much.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.